The air in Kandahar smells like dust and diesel, and something burning 3 kilometers south, it always does. Sergeant Major Zara Voss had learned to read that smell the way other people read weather. Not the burning. Burning was normal. It was the silence underneath it. The kind of silence that happens when every living thing in a 200-meter radius has already decided to stop moving. No response from position 2. She clicked again. Nothing. Her right hand dropped to the grip of her M4A1 without conscious thought. Force of habit. 12 years of walking into places that smelled wrong and trusting the thing in her chest that knew the difference between acceptable danger and the other kind. Tonight, it was the other kind. The street ahead was empty, in a way that streets in Kandahar are never empty. Even at 0200 there is always something. A dog, a light in a high window, the sound of a generator. 2 alleys over, there was none of that. The street had been cleared. Someone had made sure of it. She did not say this on comms. She held position. She watched. The mission was supposed to be simple. Simple as anything in Kandahar ever gets. Her team, 6 operators from 1st SF ODD, Delta Force, the unit that does not officially exist, had been tasked with extracting a CIA asset named only as Cardinal. Cardinal had spent 14 months embedded in a Taliban logistics network in the Helmand province. He had something. Documents. The kind that do not survive a chain of custody review. The kind that people with stars on their shoulders would prefer never existed. They had 45 minutes from insertion to exfil window. The MH-60 Black Hawk would not circle. It would come once. The route was clean. The safe house was confirmed, occupied 3 hours prior. Her team had trained on the mock-up for 6 days. What she did not know, because she was not supposed to know, was that the grid coordinates she had been given were off by 80 meters. Not by error, by design. It happened at the alley mouth, 40 meters. The first shot took out Marcus, her point man, before any of them processed the sound. The second shot went through the wall to her left. By the time the third and fourth came in, Zara was already moving. Not away, sideways, into cover behind a concrete barrier that had been someone's shop wall before a mortar round took out the front of it. 3 positions, no, 4, arranged in an L shape that covered the alley entrance and the building exits simultaneously. The geometry was exact, professional. The kind of geometry you get not from a lucky tip, but from knowing in advance exactly what route a team will take and exactly how many seconds they will need to reach the center of the kill zone. This was not an ambush that happened upon them. This was an ambush that had been waiting for them. It had been waiting patiently, professionally, with excellent positioning and pre-sighted fire lanes and a withdrawal route already planned. Somebody had planned this the same way she had planned the extraction. With a table and a map and enough time, someone knew the route, someone knew the timing. Someone had given this specific alley at this specific hour to the people currently killing her team. She heard Torres go down. She heard Callum, over comms, his voice tight and controlled even as he was hit. 2 down, taking fire from the north structure. And then Callum went quiet in a way that was different from radio silence. Zara moved through the chaos with the kind of economy that only comes from having been in worse situations and survived them. She neutralized the two closest shooters with 4 rounds. She reached the northern structure. She breached. She cleared 2 more. She found the fort position empty. Whoever had been there had already withdrawn. Professionals. This was a professional withdrawal. When the shooting stopped, the alley was silent again. She was the only one left standing. She stood in the dust and the smoke and the smell of Kandahar, and she did not cry. She counted. 6 positions she had assigned. 6 operators. She was 1. She checked each of them personally. She did not rush. This was the part of the job that nobody talks about in the briefings. The accounting, every operator knows it exists. Nobody prepares you for doing it alone in a dark alley in Kandahar with dust settling on your shoulders. Marcus had been a 12-year veteran of 1st SFODD. He had been married for 6 years, and his wife was pregnant with their first child. He had spent the week before deployment arguing with Zara about the best entry angle for the safe house extraction. She had won the argument, as she usually did, and he had told her she was insufferable about being right. He was the best point man she had ever worked with. Torres had learned to pick locks at age 14 in a neighborhood in El Paso that no longer existed. He used to say he joined Delta Force because it was the only job that paid him to use the skill set that had almost gotten him arrested 3 times. He was 29. Callum had been afraid of bees. He had confessed this to her exactly once, in the kind of unguarded moment that only happens on the 3rd day of a mission when you've been awake long enough that the usual filters come down. She had never mentioned it to anyone. She was the only person who knew. Singh had a daughter, photos every 3 weeks, always the same subject growing, always the same caption, growing fast. Petrov had joined the unit after 12 years. He was the quietest person she had ever worked with. He communicated almost entirely in raised eyebrows and small gestures. And he was almost always right. She took their tags, she put them in her left breast pocket. She pressed her hand flat against the outside of it for a moment. Then she stood up. The exfil window closed. The MH-60 Black Hawk did not come back. In the official record, it would later be noted that the exfil was cancelled due to deteriorating air security conditions, a phrase so vague as to be meaningless, selected specifically for that quality. She walked out of Kandahar on foot before dawn, moving south through alleys that smelled like dust and diesel and something burning 3 kilometers away. Always something burning. The debrief took 4 hours. The officer running it was a colonel named Dressler, a man with thin lips and the particular kind of stillness that comes not from calm but from practice. He was not looking for information. He was looking for what she knew. Zara gave him facts, only facts. She did not tell him what she had already figured out. The coordinates were wrong. She had run the route herself. She had paced it twice. The safe house had been 45 meters further north than the grid placed it, and the grid had placed her team directly into the kill zone. That was not a measurement error. That was not a transcription mistake. A mistake of 80 meters in an urban grid is not something that happens at Delta Force level without someone noticing. Someone had noticed. Someone had decided not to correct it. Colonel Dressler took notes. He thanked her for her service. He told her she was being placed on administrative leave pending a full after-action review. He said this with exactly the tone a man uses when he has already written the conclusion and is waiting for the paperwork to catch up. She looked at him for a long moment. He did not look away. She asked one question. She asked what had happened to Cardinal. Dressler said Cardinal's status was classified. She said she understood. She left the room and she did not come back. It took her 11 days to build the full picture. She had contacts outside the official structure. Every Delta operator does. The network of people who owe you something or who you owe something spread across 3 continents, none of them on any org chart. She called in 5 of those debts in 11 days. What came back was this. Cardinal had documented evidence of war crimes committed by American military personnel in Helmand province in the winter of the previous year. A pattern of targeting that was not incidental. The documentation included coordinates, timestamps, and a chain of command that went up through a logistics officer named Colonel Harkins and 2 flag officers above him, the highest being a 2-star general named Mace. General Mace had been trying to locate Cardinal for 8 months, 3 weeks before Zara's mission. The CIA had lost Cardinal's location, but someone had found it again. Not through intelligence work, but through a leak inside the unit tasked with extracting him. The mission that had been handed to Zara's team had been designed with one purpose: to send her people into a known kill zone so that Cardinal, left unextracted, would be taken by the network protecting General Mace. He had been dead for 6 days by the time Zara walked out of the debrief room. Her 5 operators were dead. The evidence Cardinal had gathered was gone, and the men who had arranged all of this were still at their desks. She sat in her quarters with this information for approximately 2 hours. She was very still for most of it. At the end of the 2 hours, she stood up, put the 5 dog tags in her jacket pocket. The administrative review concluded 3 weeks later. The finding was that Sergeant Major Zara Voss had led her unit into an engagement that exceeded the mission parameters, resulting in catastrophic personnel loss. She was found to have displayed judgment inconsistent with continued service. She was recommended for medical separation on grounds of post-traumatic psychological instability. She signed the discharge papers without argument. She did not contest the finding. She did not speak to a lawyer. On the day her discharge was processed, she closed her bank account, sold her vehicle for cash, and left the base with 2 bags and a locked metal case she had carried since Kandahar. Nobody tracked her past the gate. That was their mistake. She went to Tbilisi first, Georgia, a city that has seen enough revolutions and occupations and reinventions to develop a particular attitude toward people who arrive with cash and no itinerary and no desire to be asked about either. She rented a small apartment in the Vera district, 3 flights up, windows facing a courtyard where an old man played chess against himself every afternoon. She found this enormously comforting. She watched him through the window sometimes when she wasn't working. He never seemed to mind losing. For 3 weeks, she did nothing but eat and sleep and run every morning along the empty Kwari River until her body remembered. Not the body the army had made, her own body before all of it. She had to get there first before she could build what she needed on top. Then she began. Colonel Marcus Harkins, Logistics, Bagram Air Base, responsible for the coordinate manipulation that sent her team to their deaths. Colonel Dressler, the man who had run her debrief, the man who had known she was walking into it, the man who had watched her face while he asked her questions and taken careful notes on what she revealed. And General Harlan Mays, A2-star Joint Chiefs Advisor, Washington, D.C., the man at the top of the order. She built files on each of them, not from government databases. She built them from open-source intelligence, from contacts in 3 countries, from records that exist in places that are not officially records. She learned their routines. She learned their security details. She learned the people around them and the people around those people. She trained every day. Not the institutional training of a unit, the specific, targeted preparation of a person with a plan. She ran hills with a 40-pound ruck. She practiced room entry sequences alone in empty buildings. She went to a range in the Armenian countryside where nobody cared what you were practicing or why, and she put 15,000 rounds through a rifle that had no serial number. She did not drink. She did not contact anyone from her former life except one person. His name was Reyes. He had been her spotter in 2 combat deployments. He was the person on Earth she trusted most completely, which meant she contacted him exactly once, in person, in a cafe, in Yerevan, and told him only that she was alive and that he should stay away from her for the next several months. He looked at her for a long time. He said, "You're going to do something that can't be undone." She said, "It was already undone. I'm just correcting the record." She did not see him again for a long time. That decision would cost her more than she had calculated. Colonel Marcus Harkins had been quietly transferred from Bagram to Fort Bragg 8 months after the Kandahar incident. He lived in off-base housing in Fayetteville, North Carolina. He drove a black GMC Sierra. He had a wife who taught at the local elementary school and 2 teenage sons who played lacrosse. He jogged every morning at 5:40 a.m. along a route through the neighborhood that took him past a park, a community mailbox structure, and a stretch of road between 2 streetlights that was shadowed even at noon. Zara watched him for 4 days before she moved. She had flown into Raleigh under a different name. She drove a rental car paid for in cash through a third party. She had short dark hair. Now she wore glasses. She was staying in a motel 18 miles from Fayetteville, and she left no trace in either direction. On the 4th night, she moved. She entered his home at 2:14 a.m. through the rear sliding door, which he never locked. She had watched him forget to lock it 3 nights running. His wife was asleep. His sons. She moved through the house in absolute silence, her boots making no sound on the hardwood, her breathing so controlled it was almost nothing. She found Harkins in his study. He was awake at 2:14 in the morning, sitting at his desk with a glass of whiskey that was 3/4 empty and a book open in front of him that he had not turned a page of in the 45 minutes she had watched the window. The lamp on his desk was the only light in the house, and it made the room look like a painting. The amber light, the neat bookshelves, the military citation frames on the wall. The careful decorations of a man who has spent a career projecting the image of someone worth respecting. She saw the tension in his shoulders before she was visible and understood that on some level he had been waiting for this. Not her specifically, something. He had signed those coordinates and watched her team go out, and he had known from that moment forward that the debt existed. Guilty men always know the debt exists. She stepped into the light. She stepped into the light. He turned. He recognized her immediately. She watched it happen in his face. The sequence of denial, then understanding, then something that was almost relief. At finally knowing how this ended, he said, "Voss." She said nothing. She crossed the room, sat in the chair across from his desk, and set a folder on the surface between them. Inside the folder was 6 photographs. Her team, each one alive, each one in the field before the Kandahar mission. She watched him look at them. Then she set down a printed page, the corrected grid coordinates, the original grid coordinates, the timestamp of when the original was entered into the mission file system, and the user ID of who entered it, his user ID, his timestamp. She watched him read it. He did not try to deny it. She had not expected him to. Men like Harkins know when the math is complete. He looked up at her, and his face was the face of someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a long time and had finally been permitted to set it down. He said, "I was ordered to," she said. He said, "Mace." She said, "I know." She stood. She picked up the folder. She left his study. She left his house. She was back in her rental car in under 90 seconds. Behind her, Colonel Marcus Harkins would spend the next 4 hours making phone calls. By morning, 2 of those calls would reach General Mace's office. By the following evening, Zara would know exactly who those calls went to and what was said in them, because she had placed a device in Harkins' study that he had not noticed and would not notice until it no longer mattered. She drove back to the motel. She updated her file. She slept 4 hours. Target 1 was complete. Not dead. She wanted them all standing when it ended, because the ending she had planned was not a body count. 3 days later, the recording from Harkin's study gave her everything she needed on Dressler. Colonel Dressler, it turned out, had not merely run her debrief. He had been the coordination officer between Harkins and the asset network in Kandahar. He was the one who had confirmed the kill zone was active before the mission launched. He was the one who had sat across from Zara and taken his careful notes and then signed a report concluding that the loss of her team was the result of her own command failure. He was currently stationed at the Pentagon. He had a security detail, 2 civilian contractors who stayed close but not close enough to matter, and he had in the phone call Zara had recorded said something that changed her timeline. He had mentioned Reyes by description. The spotter, the one she used to run with, he said they had located him. He said they were watching him. He said if she moved in a direction they didn't control, Reyes would be used to redirect her. Zara sat with her laptop in a motel room in North Carolina and listened to this 3 times. Then she called Reyes on the emergency protocol they had established in Yerevan. He answered on the second tone. She said 1 word, moving. He said, "I've had a tail for 5 days. "I didn't want to call," she said. "I know. Don't run. Let them watch. I need 48 hours. He said, "Zara." She said, 48 hours, Reyes. "Then I'm coming to you." She closed the call. She sat in the dark room and she recalculated. The timeline had always allowed for the possibility that they would use someone against her, She had not fully allowed for the emotional weight of it. That was the miscalculation. She had thought she had cut all the attachments that could be grabbed. She had forgotten that Reyes was the one attachment she had not been able to cut. She understood now that this was what Mace had always planned. Not just to eliminate Cardinal, not just to silence her, to make her a problem that solved itself, by giving her a reason to move recklessly, a reason to accelerate, a reason to make mistakes. She did not move recklessly. She had 48 hours and a second target, and she was going to use every minute of both correctly. Getting to Dressler required a different kind of operation. Not physical infiltration. She was not going to breach the Pentagon. She needed him outside it. She had 2 days of recordings from Hawkins. She had Dressler's schedule, which she had built over 3 months from 12 different open-source signals. His gym, his dry cleaner, his preferred parking garage on Army-Navy Drive, the coffee shop on 23rd Street, where he stopped every Tuesday and Thursday at 7:15 a.m. before his shift began. Thursday, 7:15 a.m. She was at a corner table with a cup of black coffee when he walked in. He did not notice her immediately. He ordered. He stood at the pickup counter, checking his phone. She watched him from behind her glasses, the same face she had studied for months, older than in the file photos, a little more careful in the eyes in the way that guilty men become careful. She stood when he had his cup in hand. She crossed to him. She was close before he looked up from his phone, and by the time he registered her face, his body had already responded. A small step back, a shift of weight, the instinctive preparation. He went still, she said. "Sit down. You have 12 minutes before your card arrives. I'd like to use them." He sat. She sat across from him. She set a single printed page on the table, a transcript of the phone call between him and Hawkins. His voice, his words, the timestamp, the location data from the recording device. She watched him read it. When he finished, he looked up at her, and his face was doing something complicated. Not guilt exactly, something colder. The face of a man who is calculating whether there is still a play available to him. She said, "There isn't." He said, "You don't know what you're doing." She said, "I know exactly what I'm doing. I've known for 14 months. She leaned forward, her forearms on the table, close enough that she was speaking only to him. Marcus, Torres, Callum, Singh, Petrov. She said each name slowly and watched him receive each one. "I want you to be able to say them, because in approximately 72 hours, there is going to be a document released to 4 journalists in 3 countries that contains your signature, the corrected coordinates, and the authorization chain back to Mace. After that, whether you talk or don't talk is going to be a matter of personal preference. It won't change the document." He said, "You're bluffing." She picked up the transcript. She stood. "I'd use the time to decide what you're going to tell Mace." She walked out of the coffee shop and onto the sidewalk and blended into the morning pedestrian flow on 23rd Street without breaking stride. She had trained it to stay there in exactly these moments behind her. Dressler sat with his untouched coffee and his phone already unlocked, and the particular paralysis of a man who has run out of moves. 46 hours after her call to Reyes, Zara was in Richmond, Virginia, parked 2 blocks from the building where military intelligence contractors had placed a loose surveillance on her former spotter. She had watched the surveillance for 6 hours. Two-man team, standard civilian counterintelligence setup, not combat operators, watchers. They rotated positions every 4 hours. They communicated by text. They had one vehicle between them, a blue Honda CR-V, which they moved twice during her observation window. At 2 a.m., she called Reyes again. She said, "Walk to the 7-Eleven on Broad Street at 2:30, buy something, take your time." He said, and then she said, "I'll meet you at the back of the parking lot. Leave your phone on the counter of your apartment when you go." He did exactly what she said. At 2:34 a.m., she pulled alongside him in the parking lot. He got in. She drove. She didn't speak for 3 blocks. He said, "You look different." She said, "I know." He said, "Are you okay?" She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. She said, "I have one more thing to do." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Miss." She said, "Yes." He said, "Let me come." She said, "No." He said, "Zara." She said, "I need you to be the person who can speak clearly when this is over. I need at least one person standing who can say what happened. That's you. That's why you can't come." He didn't argue again. He understood. He had always understood her this way. That was why she had trusted him with 2 combat deployments and nothing else. She drove him to a motel outside the city that she had prepaid in cash. She gave him a sealed envelope and told him to open it in 48 hours if he hadn't heard from her. He looked at the envelope for a long moment. She said, "It's just the names of 5 people and what happened to them, and who made it happen, in case." He looked up at her. His eyes were the eyes of someone trying to find the right thing to say and failing. She said, "Get some sleep." She drove away before he could say anything that would cost her the composure she needed to keep. General Harlan Mace was not an easy target. He had been in Washington for 3 years. He had a full security detail. 4 uniformed, 2 plainclothes. His residence was in McLean, Virginia, a private estate behind a wall and a gate with camera coverage on all 4 sides. His professional movements were varied and irregularly scheduled. He was the kind of man who had been careful for so long that caution had become part of his personality, indistinguishable from his nature. Zara had been watching him for 6 months. She had his morning schedule, his evening schedule, his reaction to threat stimuli. A man like Mace changes his patterns when he perceives danger, and she had watched him change his patterns twice after her contacts with Harkins and Dressler. She had mapped every change and found the one constant. Every Sunday morning at 6 a.m., General Mace walked his property alone. His detail remained inside the house during this window. 20 minutes, the same circuit of his own grounds. No exceptions in 6 months of observation. Sunday morning, 6 a.m., 20 minutes. She had 1 week to be ready. She spent it in a rented room in Falls Church, Virginia, reviewing every piece of information she had accumulated. She went through the estate blueprints she had obtained through property records and cross-referenced them with the satellite imagery she had pulled through 3 separate private services over the previous months. She had the entry point, a section of the western wall where the camera had a 4-second blind spot during its sweep cycle, created by the overhang of a mature oak tree that Mace had presumably planted 30 years ago and now worked against him. She had the approach, she had the exit. She had the document, the full file, every piece of evidence she had spent 14 months compiling on a sealed drive that would be transmitted to 4 journalists the moment she confirmed her exit. She had set this transmission on a dead man protocol. If she did not confirm cancellation within 6 hours of activation, it sent automatically. She activated the protocol on Saturday evening at 18:04. She confirmed the transmission parameters 3 times. She checked the journalist contacts, 2 in London, 1 in Berlin, 1 in Washington, D.C. She checked the file integrity. She checked the encryption. She checked the delivery mechanism. She was committed now. There was no choice that did not lead forward. There was no version of the next 24 hours in which she turned back and the 5 dog tags in her pocket became anything other than what they already were. She sat with that for a moment. Not doubt. Clarity. This was the version of the mission where the mission is genuinely the only thing left, where personal outcome has ceased to be a variable worth calculating. She had reached that place 11 months ago, and she had stayed in it. And what she found there was not peace exactly, but something that functions like peace in the absence of alternatives. She slept 3 hours. She woke at 4 a.m. She ate. She ran through the sequence one more time in her mind, with a focused repetition she had used before every significant operation of her career. Entry, approach, contact, objective, exit. Each one broken into its component movements, each component broken down until it was not a plan but a reflex. By 5:30 she was dressed. By 5:40 she was moving. At 5:50 a.m. on a cold Virginia Sunday, Sergeant Major Zara Voss, discharged, officially unstable, no longer a soldier in any legal sense, approached the western wall of General Harlan Mace's McLean estate through 14 inches of pre-dawn dark with her M4A1 slung across her back and 5 dog tags in her left breast pocket. She felt nothing complicated. That was what she had trained for. Save it for after. At 5:50 a.m. on a cold Virginia Sunday, Sergeant Major Zara Voss, discharged, officially unstable, no longer a soldier in any legal sense, approached the western wall of General Harlan Mace's McLean estate through 14 inches of pre-dawn dark with her M4A1 slung across her back. She felt nothing complicated. That was what she had trained for. Save it for after. She was over the wall in the 4-second blind spot at 5:54 a.m. She landed on soft grass, rolled to her feet, and was moving immediately, not running, walking fast in the kind of deliberate silence that is its own form of speed. She moved through the gaps. The garden at the rear of the estate was formal hedgerows, brick paths, a stone bench near a reflecting pool. She cleared the eastern camera arc at 5:57 and positioned herself behind the hedgerow at the path's midpoint. She heard him at 6:01 a.m. Footsteps on the brick path, even pace. A man who has walked the same circuit so many times, it has become automatic. She had known from his surveillance profile that he walked these 20 minutes without a phone, without earbuds. Just the sound of his own property. The kind of quiet that powerful men grant themselves in the mornings before the day requires them to perform. He came around the hedge at 6:02. He stopped. She was standing in the path 3 meters in front of him. They looked at each other. He was older than his official photographs. A general's face which carries not just age, but the particular weight of decisions that are not reversed. He was in civilian clothes, a fleece jacket, walking trousers, boots. He looked at her for a very long time. Then he said, "Voss." She said, "General." He did not run. He did not call out. He had lived with this possibility for 14 months. She could see that in how quickly the surprise left his face, replaced by something that was almost resignation. He was a man who had been waiting for a bill to arrive. She said, "You sent my team to die." He said, "I gave an order." The mission parameters, she said, "Don't." He stopped. She reached into her left breast pocket. She took out the 5 dog tags. She held them in her open palm, and she walked to him slowly, not threatening, not rushing, and she set them on the stone bench beside the bath one at a time, with the deliberate care of someone who has thought about this specific moment on every morning. She said each name as she set it down. Marcus the tag made a small sound on the stone. Torres, another, Callum, Singh, Petrov. She stepped back. She looked at him. She let the silence do what it was going to do. The pre-dawn light had begun to grey the edges of the sky behind the tree line. Not sunrise yet, not quite, but the earliest signal of it, the sky going from black to a deep blue-grey in the east. In an hour, this would be a morning. In an hour, Mace would presumably be getting on a phone to lawyers and making the first of many decisions about how to survive what was coming. That was fine. She had accounted for all of that. What she needed from him was the only thing she had come to collect. She said Cardinal had documentation of what happened in Helmand province. 3 villages. Winter of last year, your name is on the order that had him silenced. Your name is on the authorization chain that gave Harkins the coordinates that sent my team into that alley. You did not pull a trigger. You signed a paper. Multiple papers. The papers are in the file. She paused. I want you to say it. Not for me. For them. She gestured at the dog tags on the bench. I want you to say what happened to 5 people whose names you signed away and never had to say out loud. A very long silence. The birds started again, somewhere in the estate, and this time continued, a small, persistent sound in the grey morning, indifferent to everything happening beneath it. General Mace looked at the 5 tags on the stone bench. He was a man who had been a soldier, and then an officer, and then a general, and along the way had learned to make decisions that he could live with by not examining them too closely. It was not serving him now. The names were on the bench in front of him, and there was a woman standing in his garden who had carried them 14 months across 3 countries, and he could not find a calculation that made any of this navigable. He said, "That is what happened." She nodded once. She felt something settle in her chest that had been suspended for 14 months. She said, "The full file is being transmitted in 5 hours and 40 minutes to journalists in London, Berlin, and Washington. The coordination chain, the corrected coordinates, the authorization signatures. Harkins, Dressler, you." Everything. He looked at her. She said, "I came here so you would know it was me, so you would know it was always going to be me." She turned. She walked back toward the Western Mall via the same camera gap route she had entered. She heard him behind her, not following, not calling out, just standing in the grey morning among the brick paths and the formal hedges with the 5 dog tags on the stone bench beside him. She cleared the wall at 6:07 a.m. She confirmed her exit protocol at 6:09. The file transmitted at 11:49 a.m. The story broke in 3 countries simultaneously. The official response was exactly what official responses always are: a statement from the Pentagon confirming that a review had been opened into allegations of command misconduct related to operations in the Helmand province. Senator inquiries were filed. An Inspector General investigation was announced. Legal counsel was retained. General Mace was placed on administrative leave pending the review. Colonel Dressler was quietly removed from his Pentagon post. Colonel Hawkins was reassigned pending investigation. None of these things were the ending. They never are. The ending of a story like this is never the institution finally doing the right thing. Institutions do not do the right thing on their own. They respond to force. The force in this case was a file built over 14 months by a woman who was officially no longer a soldier, acting with no authorization, answerable to no one. Reyes opened the envelope. He called the number inside, a journalist in Washington, and said he was a first-hand witness to the operational context and would speak on background. He did not know where Zara was. She had not told him. She was in Budapest when the story broke. She watched it on her laptop in a rented apartment in the 7th District with a cup of coffee going cold beside her and the sound of the street below, trams, voices, the particular rhythm of a city that has survived everything thrown at it coming through the cracked window. She had cooked her own meal. She had sat at a table to eat it. These were deliberate choices, the kind of ordinary acts you practice when you have spent 14 months in a mode of existence where ordinary acts are impossible, where every meal is fuel and every rest is tactical and every movement in every city. She had been practicing ordinary for 3 weeks. She was getting better at it. She watched the story break across 3 news feeds simultaneously. London first, then Berlin 20 minutes later, then Washington just before noon. She watched the official response appear within 2 hours. The Pentagon statement, precise and empty, confirming that a review had been opened into allegations related to command conduct in the Helmand Province Theater. She watched senator inquiries filed. She watched the first legal representation announcements. She watched the machine do what it does. She felt something shift in her chest. Not relief. Relief was the wrong word, for what happens when you have done something that costs everything it cost? She thought about Marcus, who had once made her laugh in a briefing room by doing an exact impression of their commanding officer while said commanding officer was standing directly behind him. She thought about Torres, who sent photos of his daughter every 3 weeks, always the same subject, his daughter at a different age, always with the caption, growing fast. She thought about Callum, who had been afraid of nothing in any operational context she had ever shared with him and had once confessed to her that he was afraid of bees. She thought about 5 people who were dead because a general had wanted to protect a record of something that should not have happened. She thought about whether what she had done made any of them less dead. But the record existed now. The documentation lived in 4 countries in the hands of 4 journalists who could not be simultaneously silenced. Whatever the institutions ultimately did with the review, and she had no illusions, the record existed. The names existed. What had happened could not be made to not have happened. That was what she had been able to do. She was at peace with it being incomplete. Perfect justice was not a thing she had ever been in the business of providing. She was in the business of impact, and impact was what she had delivered. She washed her plate. She stood at the window of the Budapest apartment and looked out at the Danube in the late morning light, the river doing what rivers do. Moving without purpose, moving without stopping, taking everything that fell into it. 3 weeks later, in a cafe in Vienna that she had chosen because it had 4 exits and she could see all of them from the corner table, Reyes found her. She had known he would. He was the only person who could. He did not ask where she had been. He looked at her the way he had always looked at her, as if trying to read the instrumentation underneath the surface, as an analyst reads a radar return, looking for what is actually there. He said, it worked. She said, part of it. He said, what's the other part? She said, the other part was always going to take longer. He was quiet for a moment. He said, she looked out the cafe window at the Vienna street, at people walking in coats in the cool October air, at a city that had accumulated enough of its own history, empire and occupation, and war and reinvention to develop a particular kind of dignified indifference to the private catastrophes of visitors. Nobody in Vienna was going to ask her what she had done or why. Nobody was going to ask her to explain the weight of the 5 tags in her pocket. The city simply continued, as cities do, indifferent and beautiful. She found this comforting in the way she had found the chess-playing man in Tbilisi, comforting the world continuing without her input, just existing, not requiring anything. She said, I think so. He sat back. He said, where will you go? She said she didn't know yet. That was true. She had not planned beyond this point, not because she hadn't thought about it, but because in the months of preparation she had never been fully convinced she would reach it. She had operated as though she would. But knowing something intellectually and feeling the weight of the actual outcome are 2 different experiences. And she was still adjusting to the second. He said, I could use a partner on something that doesn't exist officially. Something I can't tell you about in a cafe. She looked at him. He said, just think about it. She said she would think about it. She spent 2 weeks in Slovenia before she decided anything. There was a ridge above the Sava Valley that she found on the second day, a 3-hour climb from the nearest town, and she went back to it every morning until she had climbed it enough times that her body stopped counting and just moved. The ridge had a view of the valley and the mountains beyond it. And in the early mornings, before the cloud cover came in from the west, you could see a very long distance in all directions, the kind of distance that makes the world feel properly scaled. She carried the 5 dog tags, still. She did not know if she would ever not carry them. She thought perhaps that was all right. Not every wound is supposed to close. Some wounds are the shape of people, and the shape of people does not dissolve. She stood on the ridge on the last morning and looked at the valley and felt the wind come across from the north, the kind of wind that carries autumn in it even in October, the unmistakable early signal of something ending and something else becoming possible. She was not the person she had been 14 months ago. She was not entirely certain who she was now. She understood that discovering that was going to take more time than she had previously allocated. She had learned to work with incomplete information, and she was going to apply that skill to herself. She took the 5 dog tags out of her pocket. She held them in her palm. 5 names, 5 people, a debt she had done what she could with. She closed her fingers around them. She turned and began the climb down. Somewhere there is a classified file that has been reopened. Somewhere there are 4 journalists working a story that official responses have not yet been able to contain. Somewhere there are 3 officers whose certainty about their own safety. And somewhere there is a woman on a train or a ridge or a corner table who no longer exists in any official database, who carries 5 dog tags and a very specific kind of knowledge about what one person can accomplish when everything else has been taken away. Her name was Sergeant Major Zara Voss. It was, officially, nobody's name anymore. It belonged to a woman who had been administratively separated on grounds of psychological instability, who had walked off a base in North Carolina with 2 bags and a locked metal case and been absorbed into the civilian world. The army did not know where she was. That was the point. She had given them Kandahar. She had given them 12 years and the 5 best people she had ever known. She had given them her rank and her record, and eventually she had taken the truth back. It was not enough. It was not close to enough. But it was what she could do, and she had done it completely, and that was the only metric that had ever mattered to her. The wind on the ridge was cold and clean, and it smelled like nothing in particular. Not dust, not diesel, not anything burning. Just air moving through a place that had no part in anything she had been through and no opinion about how it ended. She breathed it in. She walked down. If this story stayed with you, if Zara's choice and her cost and what she did with it reached something in you, hit subscribe. There are more stories like this one waiting. People who were written off, who were buried, who came back and did not ask permission. We tell their stories here. Hit the like button, leave a comment, and we'll see you in the next one.